We have all been sold a very specific, carefully constructed story about the past. It is a story designed to make us feel grateful for the present, a narrative that insists we are standing at the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. We are taught from the very moment we enter the modern educational system that before the dawn of the 20th century, medicine was a dark, primitive, and often barbaric practice. We are told to imagine pre-1900 hospitals as bleak, infectious charity wards. We picture grim, windowless rooms filled with suffering, where the unfortunate went to die in agony, surrounded by the profound ignorance and the overwhelming filth of the era. It is a comforting narrative, one of relentless, rational progress. It allows us to look at the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of our modern medical facilities and feel safe. But that entire story completely falls apart the moment you actually look at the surviving photographs of the old world. When you dig into the forgotten archives, when you blow the dust off the architectural records that they missed, and you look at the true pre-1900 hospitals of our past, you do not see primitive squalor. You do not see the dark, terrifying wards we were promised by the history books. You see imposing, breathtaking architectural monuments. You see palatial spaces engineered with flawless, almost impossible acoustics. You see sprawling, meticulously designed courtyards, impossibly high vaulted ceilings, and grand windows designed to flood the interiors with natural light. These were not places of despair. They were sanctuaries of immense power and grace. And hidden within these faded black and white photographs is a glaring architectural anomaly. It is an anomaly that fundamentally breaks the official narrative of medical history. An anomaly so profound that once you see it, you can never look at a modern hospital the same way again. These magnificent structures were equipped with massive, complex bell systems. Now, when I say bells, your mind likely goes to a church or a cathedral. We have been conditioned to associate massive bronze bells strictly with religion, with the calling of a congregation to prayer, or perhaps with the keeping of time in a civic square. But in these old-world hospitals, the bells were not in the chapels. They were not isolated in distant administrative towers away from the patients. Every single giant bell was built directly into the recovery wards. They were suspended above the beds, integrated into the very vaulted ceilings of the rooms where the sick and the injured lay. I am not asking you to believe anything blindly. I am not here to spin a wild theory. I am just asking you to look at the physical evidence, to look at the blueprints and the photographs, and ask yourself one simple, logical question. Why would a building designed purely and entirely to treat the sick require such a colossal, perfectly integrated acoustic structure of bells? Why would architects expend such massive amounts of wealth, engineering genius, and physical labor to suspend thousands of pounds of meticulously cast resonant metal directly above vulnerable patients? To find the answer, we have to look past the visual grandeur and understand the invisible mechanics of the technology. We have to look at the exact frequencies these specific bells produced. Modern acoustic therapy researchers, utilizing advanced digital spectrum analyzers, have managed to study the few surviving pre-industrial bells of similar make. What they observed completely shatters our modern arrogance. These massive, intricately cast bells did not just make a loud noise. They emitted deep, sustained, harmonic tones precisely in the range of 40 to 200 hertz. They produced profoundly complex overtones that did not just reach the ear, but physically penetrated the human body. Today, cutting-edge science is studying this exact frequency range. Modern researchers are using highly expensive, artificially powered machines to generate 40 to 200 hertz vibrations, praising it as a miraculous new frontier for biological and cellular repair. They are finding that these specific low-frequency acoustic waves can stimulate bone density growth, accelerate the healing of deep tissue wounds, reduce massive inflammation, and profoundly calm the human nervous system. We call it vibroacoustic therapy today, and we patent the machines that produce it. But this was not a modern discovery. It was an ancient, global standard. In the deeply suppressed archives of an Edinburgh hospital administrator, dated 1847, there is a handwritten diary that I have spent hours analyzing. The ink is fading, the pages are brittle, but the words are devastatingly clear. This administrator detailed exactly how the ward bells were operated. They were not rung randomly. They were played. They were struck in highly specific, mathematical patterns designed to cure what he called nervous disorders and stagnations of the blood. He described the exact duration of the ringing, the specific sequence of the tones, and the periods of absolute silence mandated between the strikes. And then, with almost clinical, undeniable detachment, the administrator noted the results. He recorded that the sonic resonance produced healing outcomes that the crude chemical treatments of the era simply could not match. He documented bedridden patients regaining their strength, chronic pain dissipating, and severe mental distress evaporating after consecutive days of these acoustic baths. This was not a placebo. This was an applied science of vibrational physics, and it was not an isolated experiment happening in a single Scottish city. It was a global paradigm. When you trace the records, a stunning pattern emerges. We find documented medical records of tonal treatments being prescribed as standard practice in the grand hospitals of Vienna in 1816-3. The Austrian physicians wrote of using sustained acoustic waves to break up congestion in the lungs and align the humors of the body. We see Portuguese colonial records from Macau in 1904 describing massive, resonant metal vessels used within the colonial hospitals to treat severe tropical fevers and restore what they termed vital energy disturbances. The global reach of this technology is staggering. Perhaps the most haunting account comes from the testimony of a patient in New Orleans in 1887. She was admitted to one of the grand palatial asylums of the city with a condition that modern doctors of her time deemed entirely incurable. In her personal journals, she did not write about being given pills or subjected to invasive surgeries. She documented waking up every single day to the deep, bone-rattling sound of the massive ward bells. She described how the sound did not just enter her ears, but traveled through the intricate woodwork of the hospital beds, up through her spine, and deep into her chest. She wrote about feeling the vibration inside her very marrow, and she documented, day by day, week by week, feeling her incurable condition physically dissolving from her body. The resonance was literally vibrating the disease out of her cellular structure. You see, we have fundamentally misunderstood what these buildings were. The Old World Hospital was not just a container for sick people and doctors. It was a machine. It was an elaborate, self-sustaining, environmental machine. The massive windows that allowed the sun to naturally sterilize the wards, the calculated airflow that prevented the stagnation of air, the precise geometric and spatial proportions modeled after the golden ratio, and, most importantly, the acoustic resonance of the bells. All of it worked together. All of it was the treatment. The architecture itself was the medicine. The building was the physician. So, what happened? If this technology was so effective, if it was producing results that modern chemical therapies struggle to replicate without a myriad of side effects, why did it all stop? Why don't we have resonance wards today? Why are our hospitals today filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the beeping of heart monitors instead of the deep, healing tones of harmonic bells? It was not a scientific revolution that ended the era of acoustic healing. The bells were not phased out because they were proven ineffective by rigorous scientific trial. They were phased out because of an economic revolution. Free, vibrational medicine had become a massive, insurmountable business problem for those who wished to control the future. To understand the erasure of this technology, we have to look at the exact moment the system inverted. In 1910, a document was published in the United States that would forever alter the course of human health. It was called the Flexner Report. Officially, it was presented as a noble effort to standardize medical education and weed out charlatans. But when you look at who funded the research, the true motive becomes terrifyingly clear. The Flexner Report was heavily bankrolled by the exact massive industrial foundations that were concurrently investing heavily in the nascent, petroleum-based pharmaceutical industry. The report established a set of rigid, uncompromising standards for what could be considered legitimate medicine. Within a single decade of its publication, the Flexner Report forced the absolute closure of more than half of all American medical schools. And which schools were targeted? The ones that taught botanical medicine, the ones that taught advanced hydrotherapy, and the ones that understood the profound medical application of acoustic frequency. The only medical institutions allowed to survive, the only ones that received the massive influx of foundation funding, were those that fully aligned with a new, strict model of chemical intervention. The curriculum was rewritten globally. The ancient knowledge of frequency and resonance was suddenly mocked as pseudoscience, scrubbed from the textbooks, and banned from clinical practice. Why? The answer is brutally simple. Because you cannot patent a frequency. You cannot monopolize the resonance of a massive brass bell. You cannot put a copyright on a 432 Hz sound wave. Just as you cannot monopolize the sunlight streaming through a vaulted window, or patent the healing properties of a botanical garden. If the hospital itself is the cure, and the cure requires nothing more than the ringing of a bell and the physics of sound, there is no repeat customer. There is no product to bottle, package, ship, and sell at 1,000% markup. The profound, tragic shift happened almost overnight. The hospital was violently stripped of its status as a resonant healing environment. It was systematically transformed into a sterile, neutral building. The modern hospital ceased to be a machine of healing and became a mere delivery mechanism. It became a place where you go to be administered commercially produced, heavily regulated, and strictly patented chemicals. And what was the glorious progress they offered humanity in return for taking away our acoustic sanctuaries? What was the highly scientific, modern medicine that replaced the harmless, vibrational frequencies of the bells? In the early 20th century, the newly minted, scientifically approved doctors were legally prescribing heavily addictive heroin as an over-the-counter cough suppressant for toddlers. Cocaine was widely distributed as a medical miracle for toothaches and lethargy. This was the chemical utopia that replaced the old world machines. But establishing a monopoly on medicine was not enough. To fully usher in this new era of perpetual chemical dependency, to ensure that the masses would rely solely on the pharmaceutical industry for their well-being, they had to ensure the old way could never be tested again. The physical evidence had to be erased. As long as those magnificent architectural machines stood, as long as those massive bells remained suspended in the wards, there was always a chance someone might ring them. There was always a chance humanity might remember, and so began the Great Erasure. Between 1880 and 1910, in dozens of countries simultaneously, a coordinated, devastating campaign of architectural destruction took place. Almost every single one of these palatial acoustic hospitals was targeted. They were quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly demolished. We are told they were torn down because they were fire hazards, or because they were structurally unsound, or because the cities simply needed the space. But when you look at the construction of these buildings, they were fortresses of stone, brick, and iron, built to last for thousands of years. Yet, they were leveled to the ground. If you try to look for the original construction records, the architectural blueprints, or the acoustic engineering plans of these buildings, you will find empty folders in the city archives. The records are gone, burned, lost, or classified. But the physical evidence of their sudden, violent destruction is captured in hundreds of photographs from the era. Grand buildings with domes and massive arches reduced to rubble, making way for the ugly, utilitarian, concrete boxes we call hospitals today. But destroying the buildings was only half the job. The real target was the technology inside them, the bells. Where did the massive, meticulously tuned instruments of healing go? A very small number were quietly moved to museums or placed in the courtyards of modern civic buildings, vaguely relabeled by historians as civic bells or warning bells to completely hide their true medical purpose. But the vast majority, thousands upon thousands of massive, low-frequency healing instruments, simply vanished from the public eye. They needed a way to completely destroy the metal, to melt down the evidence without raising the suspicion of the global population. They needed a catastrophic event to justify the mass confiscation of resonant metals. Then came the World Wars. It was the perfect cover, the ultimate, unquestionable justification. Under the dark, terrifying banner of the war effort, citizens in Great Britain, France, Germany, the United States, and beyond were subjected to massive propaganda campaigns. They were mandated, shamed, and legally forced to hand over their metals. Anything of brass, bronze, or copper was to be sacrificed for the defense of the nation. And right at the top of the confiscation lists were the bells. Every surviving low-frequency bell from the old asylums, the colonial hospitals, and the grand healing centers was systematically hunted down. They were pulled from their mounts, dragged through the streets, and loaded onto trains. They were taken to the blazing furnaces of the military-industrial munitions factories. There, these sacred instruments, cast with profound mathematical precision to heal the human body, were completely melted down. The profound, sickening irony of this cannot be overstated. The ultimate instruments of human healing, the technology designed to repair cellular damage and bring harmony to the nervous system, were literally transformed into the very things that tear human bodies apart. The bells of healing were melted into bullets, shrapnel, and cannonballs. The technology of life was forged into the machinery of mass death. Could this all be a coincidence? I am asking you to truly think about the timeline. Could a global medical transition from holistic frequency to patented chemicals, the sudden simultaneous demolition of acoustic hospitals in cities worldwide, and the incredibly methodical, systematic melting of these specific bells truly have happened organically? Could it all just be a series of unrelated events, driven by nothing more than random chance and the natural march of time? Or was there a profound, deeply coordinated coordination? If the pre-industrial hospitals belonged to a global society that understood the deep, undeniable relationship between acoustic frequency, architecture, and human health, then the tragedy is far greater than we can comprehend. We didn't just lose a few grand buildings to the wrecking ball of modernity. We were forced to forget our own nature. We were severed from a symbiotic relationship with sound and resonance that had likely kept humanity healthy for centuries. I am not here to tell you exactly what to believe. You have a mind, and you have intuition. I am only asking you to look at the empty spaces in our cities where these magnificent healing machines used to stand. I am asking you to listen to the sterile silence of the modern hospital ward. And I am asking you to ask yourself, was the original infrastructure of healing so undeniably powerful, so universally effective, and so utterly immune to corporate monopoly that the only way they could possibly sell us a lifetime of patented chemical cures was by making absolutely sure there wasn't a single bell left to ring the truth?